They should have been keeping us safe. They should have been ensuring that a tragedy like that could never happen. Grenfell was totally avoidable. Totally avoidable. If the council and if the TMO had treated us with a modicum of respect and humanity, Grenfell would have been avoided.
The Grenfell Tower fire on the morning of the 14th of June 2017 shocked the nation. But for Eddie Daffarn, a Grenfell resident who survived the blaze somehow on the 16th floor, it was the consequence of years of neglect and mismanagement of his home. Eddie endlessly challenged his local authority and council, demanding improvements for Grenfell and assurance that the building was actually safe. He founded the Grenfell Action group and wrote hundreds of blogs before the fire with complaints and warnings about conditions in the block. But it was this post, written 7 months before the blaze, that predicted a serious fire in a tower block would be the only way anyone would be held accountable for the conditions residents of Grenfell were living in. As Eddie tries to move beyond the devastating impacts of the fire, he speaks for the first time of the events of that night and his intent to seek justice for the victims and survivors as the Grenfell inquiry gets underway.
You've said you've seen this as a 3-act tragedy. What are those 3 acts?
The first act was pre-Grenfell, how we were treated as a community, how such a eloquent, diverse, ethnically, socially, economically diverse community could be treated, could be ignored, could be bullied, marginalised, not listened to in the 21st century, in the 5th richest country in the world. Second act of the tragedy is what happened on that evening, what happened in the immediate aftermath, how we were just abandoned and left by the state, how it was the community that came and rescued us. And the third act of the tragedy is everything that's happened subsequently to that. How 11 months after the tragedy, many families are still living in hotels.
You were on the 16th floor. Tell us what you first detected or sensed.
So on the night of the fire itself, I was in bed. It was just past 1 o'clock. I'd just been listening to a radio program. I then heard my neighbour's smoke alarm. So no general alarm, just my neighbour's smoke alarm.
The local one inside his flat.
Inside his flat. A ping, ping, ping sound. I was so unconcerned that I just lay in bed and was thinking, burnt some chips or something along those lines. Maybe like a minute later, I heard a commotion out in the hallway, in the communal area outside my flat. That was unusual, at after 1 o'clock in the morning. So that was enough. So from previously being very inactive at the not responding, I got out of bed, threw on some clothes, went to my front door, pulled open the front door, expecting to kind of see my neighbour outside or something like that. And this thick, acrid smoke that is hard to describe just came flooding into my flat. And, so it was obviously something very serious happening. I just closed my door straight away and my heart kind of just sunk. And I'm like, okay, I think probably what I'm going to do is just stay in my flat because that's what we've been told to do. And then literally as I was thinking that, my phone rang and it was a neighbour of mine from downstairs and he shouted at me. He said, "Get out, get out." And he said it in such a forceful manner that I didn't question. I didn't say, look, I've opened my door, there's a lot of smoke, I think I should stay. I just acted. And I ran to my bathroom, I got a towel, I wetted the towel, wrapped it around my face, came back to the front door, opened the front door.
Picked up no possessions, nothing?
No, I picked up my phone and my keys as a force of habit, but not in a thinking way. Went out into the hallway, closed the front door behind me, turned round, and then was faced with just this total darkness, just this smoke swirling around. That expression, I couldn't see beyond the end of my nose. Then I had to make my way to the emergency exit, which was about 5 metres diagonal over the other side of the communal area, and so I made my way over there. I remember little about it, and then instead of finding the door that would have let me out into the emergency stairwell, I found a piece of boxing in that had been done as part of the improvement works. So I was just literally pouring away at this wall, and instead of thinking logically and moving to find the door, I just started pouring away, and then I let go of the towel and the towel fell down. Then I'm thinking to myself, you know, I'm not going to get out of here. And then just at that moment, literally, I think I probably had about 3 or 4 more breaths left, a fireman came through the emergency doorwell.
Right up on the 16th floor?
On the 16th floor.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was it was actually what had happened is my neighbour who lived next door to me had gone down and begged the fireman to come up and help rescue a relative of his who'd been unable to leave the flat, and that was the sole reason that the fireman was there at that time. The building wasn't full of firemen at that time, so the chances of it happening were just, you know, it was just like 1 in a million that there was a fireman there at that time. 3 breaths later and I wouldn't have been there. So. And then I was able to escape into the hallway, the emergency stairwell, and then, to be quite honest with you, I just ran for my life. I mean, it was fight or flight, and I was in flight mode, and I just ran for my life.
But you sound like a lone figure. There weren't lots of other people pouring out. They were still staying in their flats.
I passed a couple of people on the stairs. I passed my neighbour who'd been asking the fire brigade to rescue his relative, and I passed, I think, 1 other person on the stairs going down. I remember little about my my exit from the building, particularly down the lower levels. I then just remember being outside next to the sports centre, which was about 150 yards away, looking up at the building, which by that time, and I mean we're looking at like 120, 125, was ablaze. I mean, in the most catastrophic way, heartbreaking way.
And everything that you had written 8 months earlier was happening in front of your eyes.
Yeah.
At what point did somebody start to think about your needs?
Certainly not until the following Monday, which was...
You mean
what?
nobody...
Nobody.
Nobody marshalled the people who were coming out of the building and said, look, we'll
No.
blankets, anything. I mean, checking your lungs, nothing.
We were left. We were abandoned.
No ambulance attention, nothing?
The first...
Somebody comes out of a burning building and...
We were told some buses would come and pick us up and take us somewhere. No buses ever arrived. We were just left standing in the street. I had an ambulance worker shout at us, "Go home," at about 2:30 in the morning. The police, I can't use the language that they were using, were telling us to you know, go away. It was terrible. It was a community. It was a community that came and opened up the rugby club, opened up Clement St James, and offered sanctuary to us. And that sanctuary was there for the following week. It took until Andrea Leadsom came down to the rugby club, the leader of the House of Commons, on the Friday morning. We begged her to send someone in authority, someone with responsibility to come and help us. It wasn't until the following Monday that the Westway Sports Centre put on some facilities, and even then we were barred entrance. You know, they didn't have a mechanism for finding out who was survivors, or it was chaos. We were abandoned. We were just abandoned. In the rugby club, I think 6 or 7 days after the tragedy, on the wall of the rugby club, we were writing the names of flat numbers and getting people to mark themselves safe or not safe.
You must have lost friends, neighbours. What lasting effect has that had on you? Has your social existence been eroded to some extent?
Completely. Not only myself, but every single life in Grenfell that was touched by this has changed completely.
Did you feel very alone?
Alone and abandoned by the state, but
Yes.
not by the community, because, you know, like I say, the community, our own community, the Grenfell community, we managed to get a sterilised area inside the rugby club, so it was only Tower residents that were allowed into this space, which they protected very well. But we were in massive shock. It was dealing with our own traumatic experience of having to escape from a burning building. It was a realization that, the loss in terms of lives of community members, although that was more difficult to pin down, and then dealing with the own trauma of losing your home and everything. It was very surreal. Like there's no other.
But there must have been cross currents in your brain, because on the one hand, here was happening something you had dreaded happening, and at the same time you were suffering personal loss, total disorientation. At what point did you feel that the state, if you like, had moved to meet you properly?
I think even now, 11 months later on, if you went and asked in the community, there's a feeling that the state has still not met that obligation. Theresa May promised within 3 weeks we'd be rehoused or rehomed. The fact is that there are many, many families, many with children, who are still living in hotels.
Do you at any point think that the relationship with the council had any element of, as it were, the fault of the community?
So my answer would be no, and the reason for that would be that the local authority, their duty to us was to keep us safe. Their role is, as custodians, is to ensure that there's protection, that there's continuity, that life isn't just. Their objective was to basically get their hands on the land. What we were saying wasn't just wild propaganda, it was evidenced. It was, this is what's happening to our community.
But in a way there may be a national message from this, which is that our society has become too unequal.
I can't answer why it,
there's inequality obviously in this borough, which is, more explicit than in any borough in Britain.
The council had like £250 million in reserves, was cutting £100 off their council tax for people who weren't on benefits. Money wasn't the issue. There was something else more sinister at play. I don't believe, but I could be wrong, but I don't believe it. I maybe just don't have the capability to take it on board that it was a kind of class act against. I think it was more driven by greed and driven by this understanding about the value of the land that we lived on, that the people that were living there lived on. And I don't actually think it's particularly helpful to dress it into just class politics, because there were real individuals who we know who hopefully will face justice, will face criminal prosecutions, will have to explain their actions in front of Sir Martin Warbeck and in front of the nation. And they will need to explain why they acted the way they acted, why it was more important to them to sweat our assets than it was to keep us safe. We couldn't stop what was happening, but we weren't going to just let them do it. We weren't going to just let them carry on without recording what they were doing to us. Every blog that we wrote was evidenced, was forensic.
What was the real purpose of your blog then? Was it to wake up people in the tower? Did they read the blog? Did they respond to you? Or was it solely to try and alert the general public to what was going on? Or did you just sort of throw it out there and just hope?
We wanted to record for history how in the 21st century, in the 5th richest country in the world, a community could be so abused, could be so marginalised, not listened to, and we wanted future generations to be able to look back and see how that was possible.
And at what point did you and Francis, who represented the Grenfell Action group, at what point did you become concerned about fire and insecurity?
Fire safety became a concern of ours quite early on. There was what appeared to be a dereliction of duty on behalf of our landlord. Our blog is on record as describing the KCTMO as a mini-mafia, non-functioning organisation. We had no confidence in their ability to keep us safe, to look after us. I don't think their concern was to keep us safe or look after us. As far as we could work out, their concern was to look after themselves. I've said before, it felt like we were a carcass and they were the vultures, and they were feeding off us. There was a famous power surge instance in 2013 where literally our electrical appliances were catching fire and exploding.
You wrote, it is our conviction, this is on the 20th of November 2016, long before the fire. It is our conviction that a serious fire in a tower block or similar high-density residential property is the most likely reason that those who wield power at the KCTMO, the council, will be found out and brought to justice. I mean, that is prophetic.
The first part of it is, let's hope that the last part of it, that they will be brought to justice, because the crying shame of this blog and what was written down, it wasn't a prophecy, it was just an accurate prediction of what happens if you have a landlord that is non-functioning, no scrutiny. But the important part of that now is are brought to justice, because things need to change. They need to be brought to justice.
You are foretelling, almost paragraph by paragraph, what was to happen to this tower. I mean, did you have any sense that it actually really ever would?
In terms of happening to Grenfell Tower, no. In terms of it happening, the writing it down is one thing, the reality, of course, and it's deeply shocking, you know. But we didn't have the power to stop or to change this anyway.
But in retrospect, it's so incredible that you picked the utterly key issues: the lack of sprinklers, the absence of alarms, blockages, and all the rest of it. You had it all. Did anybody see the blog of any consequence?
I'm sure the blog was read by those in power at the...
Were you ever contacted?
We were never contacted. We were never contacted about any of the blogs.
You were just a bloody nuisance.
We were considered, I think, worse than a nuisance. I was described by a leading counsellor at RBKC as a fantasist. We weren't fantasists. We were that what we wrote when we wrote that blog was it wasn't a prophecy. It was just a prediction. It was a logical conclusion to what would happen if you have a landlord that doesn't respect health and safety.
What lengths did you go to try to extract information that you thought would bolster your belief that the council wasn't playing fair by its own people?
We came to realise quite early how important the Freedom of Information Act was, how we were able to get documents, emails, from the council. And we used that, and with the KCTMO, we were able to apply for documents, which we obtained from them up to a certain point until we started asking for information regarding the meetings that were taking place between the contractor, Ryden, the architects, Studio E, the KCTMO, and the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. And at that point, we were then denied access to these documents. Had we had access to those documents, we would have seen the changes to the cladding. Had we had access to those documents, I believe that we would have been able to call out and challenge through the blog and through other means those changes. I believe it's vitally important that as we move forward and the search for justice comes, that these laws are changed, that legislation is passed that allows anyone living in social housing to have access to that kind of information. Because at the moment, the KCTMO were able to use the law to protect them from giving us that information.
And to what extent have relationships within the community sustained despite being broken up into different hotels and different locations?
I think we were quite fortunate in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy to understand that we needed to come together as a community and take concrete steps to do that. Our first response was very much humanitarian. It was about putting our arms around each other and supporting each other. But we did realise soon after that we'd need to get organised. So we did that with no help from the local authority or from the government. We were literally walking around with notebooks, taking people's names, email addresses, telephone numbers, saying, let's stick together, we'll stick together.
This becomes Grenfell United.
This becomes Grenfell United. So, you know, at the time, literally the 3 or 4 days after the fire, we started collecting names to form Grenfell United, which now has approximately 80% of ex-survivors and approximately 80% of bereaved family members kind of under our coverage. And yeah, since then we've been advocating and trying to keep the community together in that way.
Now, of course, there was a very difficult relationship to be looked at. One was the relationship with the council as villain, if you like, in your eyes, mm-hmm. and the other was the council as the provider of your needs.
Indeed.
And I wonder how you managed this.
So, you know, the understanding would be that government or local authorities' primary duty is to keep people safe. That's what they're there for. It was obvious to us that our local authority was not interested in keeping us safe, was not interested in scrutinising the individuals who had the responsibility for keeping us safe. Their interest was in regeneration. Their interest was in, you know, they understood that we lived in North Kensington on a gold mine. They just didn't have to dig for this gold. They simply had to marginalise us, the people that were living there, push us to one side, change the mixture of people that were living there, build new accommodation, property development, private education. They spent their time sweating the assets of North Kensington, our library, information centre, college, community centres. Their focus was on that, not on keeping us safe. And the proof of that, the consequence of that, is that Grenfell happened. They should have been keeping us safe. They should have been ensuring that a tragedy like that could never happen. Grenfell was totally avoidable, totally avoidable. If the council and if the TMO had treated us with a modicum of respect and humanity, Grenfell would have been avoided. The trouble is that the local authority has lost its authority. Any community meeting that you attend that has anything to do with the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea is conducted in a kind of, there's no respect, there's no trust. And, you know, they've just had the local elections. Many councillors who were involved with the culture of what had happened previously have left, but many are still there. Many of the senior officers who were involved with what was going on before have left, but many are still there. And until these councillors and these senior officers leave RBKC, the wounds that were created on that night and subsequently are not going to heal. It can be dealt with by the government, you know, by them taking concrete steps to show that they're taking quantifiable actions. You know, placing the local council into special measures would be one. Returning our library to us, you know, would be another. So,
but Theresa May also opened up a kind of channel in which she said, you know, you need anything, you must get in touch with Number 10 and all the rest of it. Isn't that the way the state responded? That
like we'd be rehoused in 3 weeks, or they were going to set up a public inquiry that was going to leave no stone unturned. I mean, of course, the public inquiry hasn't started in earnest yet, so it's impossible to judge what the outcome of that will be. You know, we have requested that for phase, I think there is some trust in the community that Sir Martin Moore-Bick will be good at looking at the inquiry judge will be competent and supported in phase 1 of the inquiry, which is looking basically at how the fire started, the evening of the 14th, the kind of actually the practicalities, the regulations. Phase 2, which is more about the why the fire started, the cultural issues. The community has less confidence in him. I mean, Sir Martin Moore-Bick came and visited our community, I think a week after he was chosen as a judge, and informed us that he didn't have confidence in himself to look at cultural issues. When I say cultural issues, we're looking at kind of what was motivating the council. Why didn't they feel that it was their role to scrutinise their landlord, the KCTMO? What were these drivers of regeneration, of handing all this public assets over to private property developers and private education? These are the questions that we need him to look at.
You described 3 acts in this play, but of course,
Tragedy.
in this tragedy, there are many other elements that weave in and out of these acts, and I'm still trying to find where the golden thread is that in some way brings relief to the community, justice to the victims' families, and a resolution that ensures nothing like this can ever happen again. Now, some of that is the inquiry, but some of it has to be more active than that, providing you with succour, support. Where is all that?
Well, the answer to that is it's in truth. It's in justice, and justice is a very hard word to really deal with when 72 people have been killed.
But I mean, this process of getting you out of hotels. Well, you were got into hotels. That was presumably the council. But getting you properly rehoused, still 40 odd people, 30 to 40 people. That's still the council, is it?
That is the council's responsibility, yeah. When I say the word responsibility as well, we could focus on that. The lack of responsibility, what is this word? It's like people actually understanding that it's not someone else's job to do it. It's not, the next person in the line, the manager, or it's their responsibility. And there seems to have been a great absence of this responsibility. So responsibility, actually taking care and moving us out of our hotels, moving us into homes. Eventually, in time, hopefully that will happen and people will be rehomed. Everyone will be rehomed. Then we need to think about moving on to, how this feeling is, how we're going to get, justice is a difficult word to use, but how we're going to move forward. And we have to move forward searching for truth and searching to ensure that this never ever happens again. I'll just make 2 very quick points. Hillsborough, it was nearly 3 decades of families, individuals fighting for justice and fighting for truth. If Hillsborough's to mean anything, Grenfell and the families involved with Grenfell are not going to have to wait 3 decades to get truth. We need it now. We need to be confident that we can get that truth and justice now, that we're not going to be obstructed to get that. If we're obstructed, if we don't get it, then the struggles from Hillsborough are going to mean nothing. We can't have people hiding and people blaming other people. We deserve the truth and we need to have the truth. The truth is the only way that we're going to be able to move forward.
Should there be some kind of, in every major city, some sort of resource and game plan that exists for an event like this? Or is this something which is so rare that you can't build an infrastructure to deal with it?
I would totally disagree. I'd say Grenfell 2 is just in the post, and the immediate thing that needs to happen in terms of ensuring it never happens again is to ensure that the cladding, similar cladding to Grenfell, that is on, I think, over 220 buildings, is on 128 social housing tower blocks, is removed. I was speaking to Luke Pollard, who's MP from Plymouth, a few days ago. He was explaining that in his constituency, he has 3 tower blocks that are covered in the same cladding as Grenfell. He explained that he's gone to the local authority, he's gone to the national government asking for assistance to remove this cladding, and he hasn't got any assistance. The first thing that needs to happen is that the government, local authorities need to find a way to remove this cladding from these buildings, because we've all seen what happens if a building essentially covered in petrol is ignited. So that's one thing that needs to happen straight away. Second thing is we need to change the culture around social housing. I described to you earlier on about our community. Our community has been painted as kind of work shy, immigrants, subletting. The truth, it could not be further away from the truth. We were eloquent, hard-working.
Long term, very often.
Yes, we deserve to be respected, not treated the way that we were treated. And every community living in social housing needs to be treated that way.
Does anything give you hope?
On a personal level, I have to believe that we fight for the truth to come out. It's too early to say at the moment because the inquiry hasn't started in earnest. But the inquiry needs to come up with findings, and those findings need to be implemented by the government. I mean, the inquests that were conducted at Lakenhall House, 2009, a fire that occurred in a tower block in South London and caused the death of 6 people. If those findings that came out of that inquest had been acted upon, Grenfell never would have happened. We have to ensure that nothing like Grenfell ever happens again.
The leader of the local authority has released a statement saying the fire was a tragedy that must never happen again, whatever the consequences for the council. Councillor Elizabeth Campbell says they will be assisting the inquiry to expose the lessons of Grenfell, saying they have no interest in defending anything at the inquiry. She adds they will continue to support survivors, bereaved and local residents, and that staff are doing all they can to rehouse families.